Should you buy the TMNT 2003 Ultimate Collection DVD? The short answer is yes. If you want to own a tangible and legal copy of the complete series, and if you're not foolish enough to buy all of the original individual volume discs like some of us, this is the best way to complete your collection. If you want the long answer, it's unfortunately a little bit more complicated than that. Let's talk about it.
Your DVD collection survived.
Awesome! Let's throw in something light on story and heavy on gory, cause the video monolith is ready to rock and roll!
TMNT 2003 is my favorite cartoon of all time. I watched it as a kid while it was still airing on the Fox Box and 4Kids TV. And like many of you, I'm sure, I rediscovered it when I found out it was all just on YouTube for anyone to watch whenever they wanted. But as time went on, I wanted more than that. I wanted physical media that I could call my own, where the quality wouldn't be hindered by YouTube compression. So I went and spent a little over $300 to collect all of the original DVDs. Sure, it was expensive, especially since some DVDs have become more rare than others, but I enjoyed the hunt, and I was glad to finally own it. Now, for the longest time, these old DVDs were the highest quality version of the show that one could obtain. That being said, it sets the bar pretty low. For example, there's a handful of issues caused by the MPEG-2 compression that leave behind digital noise, blocky compression, and it just doesn't leave enough data to fully bring out line work where it needs to be. Rant definitely suffers the most from this. For a pretty flat and textureless show, I don't think it should have struggled this much in the encoding process, but it's unfortunately the best thing we had for a long time. I didn't have a lot of hope after the Nickelodeon acquisition. Before this new DVD set, and the recent DVD set for the 2012 series, a complete series home release for any Nickelodeon show was pretty rare. Outside of Shout Factory sets, I cannot think of a single Nickelodeon property that got a complete series release. That is, except for one, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm gonna go ahead and squeeze in The Legend of Korra as part of the same IP. As popular as these shows are, I'm positive that these home releases really had to be fought for internally. The old DVDs were the only physical home media option, but of course, there have been other options this entire time. As a big advocate for physical media, I'm obligated not to talk about it, but for your education, I'll try to explain briefly. There was a time a few years ago when your digital options to view this series were limited to platforms like Amazon, iTunes, and YouTube that only had the first 3 seasons available for purchase. I don't have much to say about this version specifically, other than they were still bad. Despite being AVC encoded and not MPEG-2, the significantly lower bitrate causes the picture to be as bad as the DVDs, if not worse. Years after that, Viacom also started airing episodes on PlutoTV, where they had a dedicated Totally Turtles channel that played nothing but TMNT content all day, every day. And from the looks of it, it was a totally new version of this show that looked better than the DVDs or any previous digital release. Fast forward a little bit later, no pun intended, and the show was made available for streaming on a service called CBS All Access, which is now known as Paramount Plus. The picture quality itself here had a much higher fidelity than the DVDs. There was no MPEG noise, there was no blocky compression, and you could actually see line work where you should be seeing it. It seemed like the perfect version of this show had finally arrived. So what's the problem with it, you might ask? The frame rate. I won't get too deep into the nitty-gritty because I'm not a real expert in this field, but let me try to break down the issue for you here simply. Animation is traditionally done at 24 FPS, but because of NTSC video broadcasting standards, it will need to be played at 30 FPS when it's airing on TV or mastered to a DVD. Rather than just speeding it up, the animation goes through a telecine process where a progressive video is converted to an interlaced one. Rather than the picture being a complete frame, the picture has now alternating fields of a whole frame. Frames per second now turn into fields per second. The fields are played in a specific pattern that involve duplicating and blending fields in a specific way so that it can smoothly play at the NTSC standards. You most likely won't notice this difference because your DVD player or cable box will deinterlace the footage for you, and it will play progressively to a signal that matches your TV, which in most cases is probably 60 Hz. That is, if you're in the US. But in order to reverse this and restore it to its original footage, it'll have to be deinterlaced, and the frame rate will have to be properly decimated back to 24 FPS. That was kind of a long explanation, and I'm not so sure how much I got right. Feel free to correct me in the comments. So Nickelodeon did in fact try to fix this. Kinda. The problem, however, is that this show, at least according to what I can see, is not supposed to be decimated to 24 FPS. All it should need is just a good deinterlacing. You see, this show has a mix of panning sequences at both 24 and 30 FPS, so when you decimate the frame rate, you are losing unique frames of animation in the process. And during those 30 FPS sequences, you end up with a choppy camera pan as a result. This is literally the very first thing you will see on the very first episode of TMNT 2003, so I consider this pretty important. On the other hand, if you don't decimate the frame rate, those 24 FPS scenes have too many duplicate frames, and it's not perfectly smooth either. But at least this way, you're seeing every frame you're supposed to be seeing, and you aren't removing unique frames of animation. To me at least, one of those sounds, and frankly looks much better than the other. I don't know, you tell me. But on top of that, a few episodes are just borderline unwatchable in my eyes. Season 2 Episode 11 Return of Nano and Season 2 Episode 15 City at War Part 2 both have some kind of weird dot crawl type of artifact that I just can't look past. And then it seems like they just completely forgot to deinterlace Season 2 Episode 21 April's artifact, and those interlaced scan lines are now baked into the video source with no way to remove them. On top of all that, there has recently been a digital version available for purchase on places like Amazon and VUDU that's being advertised as HD. Please do not buy this version. I cannot in good faith tell you it's worth it, because I purchased it, and it isn't. Here's the thing, half of the scenes actually looked really good, with slightly more detail than what's available on Paramount Plus, and upscaled to a higher resolution. But the other half of the scenes, for some reason, have this awful denoise filter applied, causing a very hazy picture, and smearing leftover elements of previous frames into the next. I don't know how they managed to only apply this filter to specific sequences, because it changes from perfectly fine to a smeary mess multiple times in a single scene. You would really have to try pretty hard to mess it up this bad. Let me just cut myself off here to say something. I had this entire script written out, already preparing to recommend this DVD set no matter what, because I, like a fool, believed that Nickelodeon would be able to give us a good release. I just got my DVD set in the mail today, and let me tell you, I could not have been more wrong. This is the worst thing they could have presented us with. The first issue was the same as the recent quote-unquote HD release on Amazon and VUDU. I'm pretty sure they come from the same master copy. It's denoised to hell. It's a smeary mess between frames. On top of that, the second issue is that these black bars on the sides are part of the actual picture. Let me explain why that's a bad thing. Yes, these black bars are supposed to be here when you're watching the show, but they aren't supposed to be part of the video source. You see, a DVD only has enough space to store a video at a resolution of 720 by 480. One way or another, the goal should be to fit as much of the picture into that space as possible. Your TV is supposed to display it at the correct aspect ratio and add black bars by itself. So when you bake these black bars into the video source, you are literally wasting that space, and you're taking away extra resolution that could have been used to make the picture much sharper and more defined. You can see, comparing these two frames side by side, the old DVDs had a much bigger and more defined picture to work with, and the new DVDs are also slightly more zoomed in. So mathematically, if you want to know the difference between these two pictures, the new DVDs are only using a resolution of 540 by 480 of usable picture, and the original DVDs are using the full 720 by 480 frame. But wait, there's more. The third issue, and I have no idea how they managed to accomplish this, but the frame rate is still somehow bad. It's interlaced, but it's encoded in a variable frame rate. I'm not sure how much this actually changes, but panning sequences still aren't steady somehow. It's not the same as the original DVDs. If you leave it as is, it's still choppy. If you deinterlace it, it's still choppy. And if you decimate it, it's still freaking choppy. I'm not going to sit here and waste my time trying to figure it out either, because everything else about this DVD release just makes it unwatchable. And then, there's Turtles Forever, which is worse than I could have ever imagined. Not only is it the TV broadcast cut, but even after deinterlacing the footage and decimating the frame rate back to its original 24 FPS, there are still leftover combed frames that are burned into the video source that you cannot get rid of. I will never forgive Nickelodeon for the disrespect they have shown this series. This is not how the show deserves to be remembered. This is not the way the show was meant to be seen. This is not the ultimate collection that it's advertised to be. All that being said, I have to rethink my initial statement. Should you buy the TMNT 2003 Ultimate Collection DVD? I suppose now, the long answer is hell no. This collection is not worth your money. I personally am much happier with the several $100s I spent for all of the original DVDs. However, I realize not everyone is willing to pay this much money, so I would say the next best option would be to watch it on Paramount Plus. The version on Paramount Plus isn't half as butchered as this DVD release, or the so-called HD version on Amazon and VUDU for that matter. It just kinda sucks that in theory, if you want to own the Paramount Plus version, you would essentially have to pay the monthly subscription fee forever. If only you could avoid all of these costs. If only someone just took the time to make this series watchable again. If only the perfect uncut version of Turtles Forever was no longer considered lost media. Oh well. Bummer.